Imagine this, a pair of gloved hands and a kitten that shouldn't exist. Soft fur, wide eyes, and just two tiny canines that are too long. The internet would lose its mind and say, "We're back, baby. Saber-Toothed cubs by 2030. But that thumbnail has a confession stamped right on it. Birth missing, because DNA isn't a baby, a genome isn't a pregnancy, and we sequenced it is not the same thing as we can bring it safely to term. Receipts first, verdict later. Tonight, the question is simple and brutal. Can we actually birth a saber-toothed cub, or are we stuck at cool story forever? Here's the claim you'll hear everywhere. If we can edit genes, we can reverse extinction. Smilodon is basically a tech problem now. Sounds tidy, sounds inevitable. But to birth a Smilodon, you don't just need some DNA. You need a blueprint that's good enough to build a whole animal, plus a way to turn that blueprint into living cells, then an embryo, then a pregnancy, then a healthy cub that can breathe on its own. That's not one miracle, that's a chain of miracles, and the chain breaks at the weakest link. Now, the first weak link is the one people love to skip. Ancient DNA is damaged. Time shreds it. Heat, moisture, and chemistry shreds it. And fossils don't come with a label that says 100% clean, zero contamination, full instructions included. Even when scientists recover fragments, they're often piecing together a puzzle with missing pieces, and some of those pieces belong to bacteria, fungi, and whatever else moved in after death. That's why sequence can mean we recovered enough fragments to learn things, not we have a perfect genome we can print into a cell. And even if you had a near-perfect genome, you still have to pick a path to a body. Cloning would require a living nucleus quality cell from Smilodon, which we don't have. So the realistic route people imply is editing a living cat species to be Smilodon-like. That's not resurrection, that's a proxy. A modern cat with a list of edits, hoping the result behaves like an Ice Age predator. Here's your pubplex line for anyone who says DNA equals done. The hard part isn't writing letters, it's getting a living body to read them correctly for 9 straight months. And Smilodon isn't a small tweak, it's deep anatomy, development, teeth, skull, shoulders, muscle, and behaviour. So, on the claim versus lift scale, Smilodon isn't one big leap, it's a staircase where every step can collapse. So, what do we actually have today in the real world? We have powerful gene editing tools. We can edit embryos in some mammals. We can clone some animals under specific conditions. We can do advanced reproductive tech in domestic species far better than in wild ones. And we can assemble partial ancient genomes well enough to learn evolution, relationships, and traits. That's the honest baseline. Now zoom in on Smilodon. Smilodon lived in the Americas, not in permafrost vaults. A lot of famous remains come from places where preservation is complicated. Chemistry, heat, time, contamination. That doesn't mean no DNA exists. It means DNA is more likely to be fragmented, chemically altered, and incomplete compared to the dream scenario everyone imagines. And then there's the closest living relative problem. Smilodon isn't a lion with a Halloween costume. It's part of the Saber-Toothed line. Different build, different bite mechanics, different body plan. Modern big cats can teach us plenty, but close enough for a safe pregnancy is a totally different standard than close enough for an evolutionary family tree. Here's the quiet reality. De-Extinction headlines often talk like we're building one animal, but we're actually building a repeatable pipeline, because one cub that survives by luck is not a comeback. A real comeback means multiple births, healthy development, and long-term welfare. And yes, this is the part where people roll their eyes and say, "Why are you being so negative? I'm not. I'm being honest. If this was easy, somebody would have done it already and sold Smilodon plushies at the airport. Now we get to the part most channels dodge, the surrogate. If you want a born animal, you need a living mother to carry it. And pregnancy isn't a USB port you plug DNA into. It's a high-risk biological relationship between mother and fetus. Implantation, placenta, immune tolerance, hormones, blood supply, timing, growth rates, and developmental signals that have to be correct for weeks and months. When you try to create something novel, especially something not perfectly matched to the surrogate species, you risk miscarriage, stillbirth, emergency complications, suffering, and repeated failures. And the ethical question isn't theoretical, because the cost of experimentation isn't paid by a computer model. It's paid by a living animal that never signed up to be a prototype factory. Even in cases where cloning works, success often comes after many failures. That's not a moral lecture. That's just how messy biology is. So, if someone says, just use a lioness or tigress, the next question is, how many pregnancies are you willing to burn through to get one viable cub? And how do you justify that when the goal animal might not even have a safe life afterwards? Wild ones, if you like the receipts first approach where we don't hand wave the ugly parts, hit a quick thumbs up so YouTube actually shows this to people who think De-Extinction is just a cool logo and a DNA helix. Let's say, by some miracle chain, you get a live Smilodon-like cub. Now what? You're not done. You're just entering the expensive part, aftercare and purpose. Smilodon wasn't a cute pet with spicy teeth. It was a heavyweight predator built for a world that doesn't exist anymore. Its original prey base, competition, disease landscape, and ecosystems have changed. So you're not returning it to nature. You're choosing between captivity, fence reserves, or a carefully managed rewilding experiment with real risks to wildlife, livestock, and people. And cost isn't just money. It's infrastructure, veterinary expertise, long-term space, safety protocols, welfare monitoring, and a plan for what happens if the animal is sick, aggressive, or simply not thriving. Predators don't get a release and forget strategy. They get lifelong management. Here's a light truth that still stings. If the end game is a handful of animals in a facility, that's not de-extinction the public imagines. That's a zoo-grade experiment with a very expensive marketing budget. And that's where the why becomes unavoidable. If you're spending serious resources and taking serious welfare risks, what are you buying that you couldn't buy by protecting living big cats right now? Let's get surgical about the bottlenecks, because this is where birth missing becomes a real scientific wall. First, building embryos that develop normally is hard even when the species is known and the methods are mature. Development is a choreography. Genes turn on and off at the right time, in the right cells, in the right order. If that timing is off, you don't get a slightly wrong cat, you get a failed pregnancy. Second, the placenta is a nightmare in the best way. An organ that exists only for pregnancy and is wildly species specific. Lots of reproductive work fails at implantation or placental development. If the surrogate's uterus and the embryo signals don't match, nature doesn't negotiate, it rejects. Third, even if you try the proxy route, editing a living cat species to express Smilodon traits, many traits aren't single gene switches. Skull shape, shoulder strength, tooth size, jaw mechanics, growth rate, those are networks. Edit a few headline genes and you may get a cat with weird problems, not a stable, healthy animal. Here's your second flex line, because it's true and useful. De-Extinction isn't CRISPR, it's obstetrics, development, and placenta biology. CRISPR just gets the headlines. And until those bottlenecks are solved in a way that doesn't chew through surrogates, birth stays missing. Now we do the uncomfortable comparison, because the world isn't short on projects, it's short on money, time, and public attention. If you build a Smilodon proxy, what are you really achieving? You're not restoring an ecosystem role that currently has a vacancy. Modern ecosystems already have apex predators under pressure: lions, tigers, leopards, jaguars, species that can be saved right now with habitat protection, anti-poaching work, conflict reduction, and funding that actually reaches the ground. So the best case argument for Smilodon has to be more than "it would be cool." It has to be something like new reproductive breakthroughs that spill over into saving living cats, or new genetic tools that help endangered populations. That's the only version that makes sense long term. The Smilodon story as a technology driver that directly benefits animals that already exist. Because if the project becomes a spotlight hog, soaking up money and attention while living cats vanish, then you've built a museum attraction while the real world burns. And look, I'm not anti-science, I'm anti-fairy tale. If the pipeline you build doesn't protect living species, then it's not conservation, it's cosplay with lab coats. So, can we actually birth a saber-toothed cub? On the receipts, VETO for now. Not because it's impossible forever, but because the path to born, healthy, repeatable, ethical is still blocked. The core problems are stacked. Ancient DNA quality is uncertain and often damaged. Cloning style resurrection is off the table without living quality cells. Proxy editing can produce something cat-like, but that's not the same as Smilodon, and it risks welfare problems if development goes sideways. And the biggest red stamp is the one on your thumbnail. Birth requires a surrogate, and surrogates are not disposable equipment. What will change my verdict? 3 things. First, much stronger genome reconstructions with clear confidence, not hype. Second, major reproductive breakthroughs that dramatically reduce failed pregnancies and suffering. Third, a conservation-first plan where the tech clearly helps living big cats and doesn't become a vanity project. Until then, the honest answer is, we can talk about Smilodon, we can model Smilodon, we can maybe build partial traits in Proxies, but birthing a saber-toothed cub responsibly? That's still missing. And if you want to see what a big body de-extinction case looks like when we follow the receipts all the way to the end, the next watch is my orange elk de-extinction episode, because when you scale up from a cat to a giant animal, the pregnancy, aftercare, and habitat questions get even sharper. That one's linked for you right here.